In the news tonight, Syria's opposition meeting in Turkey are saying they are edging towards agreeing to international peace talks in Geneva, but need the backing of fighters inside the country. The U.S. Secretary of State says Washington will keep sanctions in place against Iran as talks on its nuclear program continue, and the Iranian president says Tehran would not bow to Western threats. And the most powerful typhoon to ever make landfall leaves over 10,000 people dead in a single city in central Philippines, with survivors queuing for food and water. Good evening and welcome to a new edition of the news. Here are the details. We begin here at home, where Minister of Foreign Affairs and Expatriate Affairs Nasser Joudeh met UN Special Coordinator for the Middle East Peace Process, Robert Suri, to discuss progress in Palestinian-Israeli peace negotiations. Joudeh and Suri highlighted the need for continued coordination and consultations with all concerned parties to achieve peace in the region. Joudeh reiterated Jordan's stance in support of the Palestinians' right to establish an independent state. Suri, for his part, voiced appreciation of the kingdom's continued effort for peace and stability in the region. In a move that could further complicate peace talks between the Palestinians and Israelis, the Israeli cabinet approved today the return of far-right leader Avigdor Lieberman as foreign minister after his acquittal on corruption charges. An Israeli government official said the cabinet endorsed Lieberman's appointment at its weekly meeting, but that final approval is needed from Parliament. His reinstatement to the role of foreign minister is likely to harden the tone of Israeli diplomacy. As head of the far-right Israel Beituna party, Lieberman has been outspoken in his skepticism about the U.S.-sponsored negotiations, saying that reaching a permanent peace deal will be impossible. On Wednesday, a Jerusalem court acquitted him on charges of fraud and breach of trust. Over to the Syria crisis, and the country's opposition meeting in Turkey are saying they are edging towards agreeing to international peace talks in Geneva. But they say they want approval from fighters inside the country first to give the process more legitimacy. Opposition sources at the talks said a draft resolution reaffirms the coalition's commitment to a political solution to the conflict. It also echoes a declaration in London last month by the Friends of Syria pro-opposition alliance, ruling out any role for President Bashar al-Assad in a transitional administration. The coalition is to vote on the resolution, but opposition sources said coalition members want to seek the backing of rebel fighting units, community leaders and activists inside Syria to counter criticism of being out of touch with those battling on the ground.
Will have two different probably delegations. One will actually be heading down to Syria, is going to be meeting with the different heads of the FSA brigades, having a discussion with them around Geneva about the next steps that we need to be taken. It's also going to be meeting with different civil society groups. It is going to be meeting with revolutionary groups. It's going to be meeting with different opposition groups. The goal is to have a unified position, that we all enter any peace process that we believe will actually accomplish the goals of the revolution in a united manner.
While some opposition members say the approval could be obtained before the end of the Istanbul meeting, which could run into next week, others believe a final decision could take up to 2 weeks. On the ground, meanwhile, Syrian forces backed by Lebanese Hezbollah fighters recaptured an army base in northern Syria from rebels after 3 days of heavy fighting for the strategic military target. The base has changed hands 3 times since Friday. State media and activists said government forces were in full control of the 80th Brigade base, which lies a few hundred meters north of Aleppo airport. They also made gains to the south of the airport, advancing in the town of Tel Arin after a succession of victories over the rebels who were holding the southeastern approaches to the city. The 6 world powers and Iran agreed to reconvene talks on Tehran's nuclear program on the 20th of this month after a round of talks ended in Geneva yesterday without a breakthrough. Clear divisions emerged among Western powers, and France declined to endorse a proposal presented at the talks, saying it did not adequately neutralize the risk of an Iranian atomic bomb. Iranian President Hassan Rouhani today defended his country's rights to nuclear research, saying Tehran will not answer to any threat, sanction, or humiliation by the West. We get more in this report.
Talks between Iran and the 5 UN Security Council members plus Germany ended without resolution. The United States and its allies narrowed their differences with Tehran in talks over the weekend, but were not able to reach a deal as France believed the proposal did not adequately neutralize the risk of an Iranian atom bomb. U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry said the United States continues to be a spectacle of Iranians' willingness to dismantle its nuclear program and will keep the sanctions in place as talks continue.
We are not blind, and I don't think we're stupid. I think we have a pretty strong sense of how to measure whether or not we are acting in the interests of our country and of the globe, and particularly of our allies. We are absolutely determined that this would be a good deal or there'll be no deal.
Britain's Foreign Secretary William Hague maintained the line struck by the U.S., saying relations have improved, differences narrowed, and talks would resume.
The parties are closer together. We're all closer together than before we had these talks. So we haven't been wasting our time. But it is a formidably difficult negotiation, of course, and we are going to reconvene these talks in 10 days' time here in Geneva.
The UN Nuclear Agency Chief, Yokia Amano, is on his way to Tehran to hold talks with Iranian officials tomorrow. He said he hopes the talks would yield concrete results to help advance a long-stalled investigation into Iran's atomic activities. The International Atomic Energy Agency is holding its own negotiations with Iranian officials separate from talks between Tehran and Western powers. Meanwhile, in Tehran, Iranian President Hassan Rouhani says his country will not compromise its national interest, but again voiced hope of gradual progress.
For us, there are red lines that cannot be crossed. The rights of the Iranian nation are our red lines. National interests are our red lines, and that includes our rights under the framework of international regulations and uranium enrichment on Iranian soil.
Iran now is hoping for a deal that would ease international sanctions that have frozen its assets around the world and prevented it from selling its oil. Lu'ayb Al-Qar for the news at 10.
In Jerusalem, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu voiced satisfaction over the failure of Iran and world powers to clinch a nuclear deal and said he lobbied against it in calls with government leaders. But he said he recognized there was still a strong desire to reach an accord with Iran and pledged an all-out Israeli effort to prevent a bad agreement, a push believed to cause more friction with the United States. In remarks at today's cabinet session, Netanyahu repeated veiled threats that Israel could take unilateral military action against Iran. Netanyahu said Iran would be getting the deal of the century if it was granted limited temporary sanctions, relief in exchange for a partial suspension of its nuclear program, and a pledge not to expand it. And to the world's most powerful typhoon make landfall. 2 days after Haiyan slammed into the central Philippines, as many as 10,000 people are believed to have died in a single city, Tacloban. Most of the deaths have been caused by surging seawater strewn with debris that many in the affected area said resembled a tsunami. According to the National Disaster Agency, close to 500,000 people were displaced and 4.5 million affected by the typhoon in 36 provinces. Those who survived are queuing in lines waiting for handouts of rice and water.
Shipments of international aid are en route to the Philippines after Typhoon Haiyan wreaked havoc in the central part of the country. Planes carrying supplies for the more than 4 million people affected by the disaster left Frankfurt on Sunday. The storm, possibly the biggest ever to make landfall, flattened entire coastal regions, leaving thousands feared dead. Local officials estimate at least 10,000 people have died in the city of Tacloban alone. Philippine President Benigno Aquino spoke to reporters at the airport there on Sunday and said the first priority was helping survivors.
Tally for the missing and also for those that have been confirmed killed. No? So that is a concern, but we are addressing first the needs of those who are still living, especially those who are injured, the need for food and the need for water.
Some food and water was being handed out to residents at Tacloban Airport, but more supplies are urgently needed. Officials said looting and lawlessness are preventing more aid from reaching the affected region. Now, Typhoon Haiyan is headed for Vietnam, where authorities have relocated more than 800,000 people. The storm is expected to hit the central parts of the country overnight.
Thousands of people across Mexico looked to the skies yesterday night as part of the annual stellar event, A Night of Stars, hosted by Mexico's National Autonomous University. In Mexico City, hundreds gathered outside the university's main building with their telescopes trained to the night sky. The university and the Institute of Science aim to encourage people to take an interest in science. Night of Stars is a popular annual event for Mexico and has drawn thousands in the past. In December 2011, Mexico scored a Guinness record with 2,700 people looking through their telescopes. The country beat their own 2009 record with some 1,000 telescopes. Pasta consumption in Italy has plummeted by almost a quarter since the start of the new millennium, sending everyone from manufacturers to restaurants scrambling to adjust. The symbol of Italy, with more than 500 variations, used to be present at every evening meal. But now pasta sales have seen a drop of 23% over the past decade. The reason? Italians are trying leaner local cuisines, and Asian restaurants are exploding across the country. But while the slump initially caused concern, pasta makers now say the drop will not cause Italy further economic indigestion. And even if Italians have become a little more carbohydrate cautious, the rest of the world still loves their national dish, which means pasta exports remains one of the few areas of Italy's economy that is still keeping up momentum. Three more days for the big game, and for those anxiously awaiting the Jordan-Uruguay football match on the 13th, giant screens will be erected at 142 youth centers across the kingdom for public viewing. The initiative by His Royal Highness Crown Prince Al Hussein will be followed up by the Higher Council for Youth to enable Al Nashama fans to cheer the team. The screens will remain up for the home and away matches. In the Argentine Championship, Newell's Old Boys maintained their 2-point lead with a 1-1 draw with their main rival San Lorenzo. Both goals came in the first half of the match, with David Trezeguet scoring for Newell's and Angel Correa equalizing for Lorenzo just 5 minutes later. A point each gave Newell's 29 points in the lead, with San Lorenzo second with 27 and Arsenal, who play tomorrow, in third. Kenyan runner Hilary Kipsang won the Athens Classic Marathon on his debut at the distance. He finished in 2 hours 13.59 seconds, followed by fellow Kenyans Dixon Cheriot and David Ruto in second and third places respectively. The classic race was inspired by the fable of a Greek soldier running from the Battle of Marathon to the city of Athens, bringing news of a Greek victory. And in the women's race, Joanne Rotic of Kenya led from the start to the finish. In second place came Svetlana Stanko of Ukraine, and in third, Greek runner Magda Gazea. A record number of 11,000 runners took part in the 31st Athens Classic Marathon. And finally, it'll be relatively cold with partly cloudy skies tonight with easterly light winds. Tomorrow, moderate weather continues with partly cloudy skies and southeasterly moderate winds. The Gulf of Aqaba should expect warm conditions, while winds will be northerly moderate and the seas calm. Here now is a look at temperatures forecast for tonight and tomorrow. And to close, here's a reminder of the day's top stories. Syria's opposition meeting in Turkey are saying they are edging towards agreeing to international peace talks in Geneva, but need the backing of fighters inside the country. The U.S. Secretary of State says Washington will keep sanctions in place against Iran as talks on its nuclear program continue, and the Iranian president says Tehran would not bow to Western threats. And the most powerful typhoon to ever make landfall leaves over 10,000 people dead in a single city in central Philippines, with survivors queuing for food and water. And with this, we come to the end of this edition of the news. I'm Alia Tuqan. Thank you for joining us and have a good night.